Okay, so let's go back and see how the war affects imperialism as well. So what were the political results of the World War? The most important ones were the destruction of three empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire are essentially de jure or de facto dissolved. And this leads to the creation of a number of new states. These are Czechoslovakia, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Ireland. Not immediately after the war, but in the next 5 years, there's going to be an Irish-English conflict in Ireland that is going to culminate in the creation of the Irish Free State. At the same time, three states that had allied with the Entente are very liberally rewarded, leading to the creation of Yugoslavia, which initially was the idea of Greater Serbia, but is called the Kingdom of Slovens, Croats, and Serbs, and South Slavs, I think. Greater Romania, as Romania is able to get the Transylvanian territories it wanted from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but also Bessarabia and Moldova from the Russian Empire, and Greater Greece, which gets to expand against the Ottoman Empire in Eastern Thrace and in the Aegean region. Now, when it comes to colonies, there's an interesting little game going on. A hypocritical one, but nevertheless an interesting one. De jure, because of the influence of the Americans, of President Wilson, the colonies that were taken from the Central Powers, essentially the colonies that were taken from Germany, but also a lot of the areas of the Ottoman Empire, the Arab areas especially, were to become independent states. This is important. For the first time, the resolution to a question of what happens to a colony is not make it a colony of another power, but technically make it independent. However, because all of these people are racists and also have economic reasons to keep colonies subjugated, they say that the colonies, these people, they're not ready for independence. So there has to be a period of mandate in which a great power will essentially guide them to freedom. So, de jure, Syria, Mesopotamia, Armenia, the colonies in Africa of the Germans, all are technically independent states. De facto, they are simply given to other great powers who create independent rulers technically, but actually run those places. Okay? But the important thing is, for the first time, there is the principle of decolonization, at least as a legal idea. As you can understand, these results of the war are not going to make the ones who lost the war very happy. Especially Bulgaria, Germany, and Hungary are very resentful. Turkey is going to be a special case because of Kemal Atatürk, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Hungary really resents the loss of Croatia, the loss of Transylvania, and the fact that large Hungarian minorities are now taken away from Hungary and given to their traditional enemies. Germany really resents the Versailles Treaty guilty clause. It resents the loss of parts of its areas to Poland and the limits on its military. Bulgaria resents losing its access to the sea, despite the fact that Bulgaria actually will gain territory as a result of this treaty. It's the only central power that comes out of the war with more territory than it went in, because in return for accepting Romania getting Transylvania, Bessarabia, and Moldova, Romania agrees to give back some of the Bulgarian territory taken in the Second Balkan War. Now, the fundamental problem here is this. When Metternich, Castlereagh, Alexander I defeated Napoleon in 1815, okay, 100 years before this event, their plan was to reintegrate France into the system of government. They said that the problem was Napoleon, not France as a country. So they never thought of a punitive treaty The Germans demanded it, the Prussians wanted a punitive treaty, but the English, the Austrians, and the Russians said, no, we want France to be part of the system. So there were serious attempts to integrate France as a defeated party to the Vienna system. They were rocky. We saw some of the crises created, like the Eastern crisis, but largely it worked. There was no such attempt with the powers that were defeated in World War I. Partly because, again, the Americans, but also a lot of European views, partly because the war was considered such a bad war, it was considered immoral not to punish the states that started it, according to the winners. So Hungary, Bulgaria, and Germany are explicitly considered as pariah nations, as is also the Ottoman Empire. They're not included into the founding of the League of Nations, as we're going to see later on. And they are essentially treated as states that have to be repressed. The result of this is that there is a lack of an ideological component. If you remember, one of the reasons for the success of the Vienna Congress system was ideology. If you remember, most of the countries were conservative authoritarian. And what was the ideology that Metternich pushed forward as a unifying idea? Has to do with legitimacy. Anybody remember? Legitimism. There's nothing like that here. You could say that there was a liberal, democratic, and republican underpinning within the League of Nations. The idea that we could create a union of liberal, democratic, and republican states. But guess what? Germany was a republic, it was a liberal government, and it was democratic. Guess what? It was excluded. So, first point undermining the story. Secondly, Hungarians and Bulgarians felt that the Allies betrayed their own promises, as will also Turks in Anatolia, for national self-determination. The idea that every nation will have its own state. Well, then why do you put Hungarian minorities under Romanian rule? Why do you put Muslim majorities under Greek or Armenian rule? And so on and so on and so on. So, very quickly, partly because the United States decides not to take part anymore in this. This is a big story, it has to do with domestic politics. Let's just say the Republican Party is at fault in the past. Continue the theme, it's not completely correct, but why not? England and France end up dominating the system. And France doesn't care about ideology. All that France cares about is keeping Germany down. The French were not able to get their favorite resolution, will be the dissolution of the German state into many small countries. So despite winning, they still have to deal with a unified German state, which now becomes a centralized German state, by the way, not a federation anymore, which is still more populous than France and still has a better industrial potential. So in a way, the French only care about deterrence, they don't care about accommodation. Let's look at the differences. This is the map of Europe in 1914. Okay? Keep your eyes especially in Central Europe and Eastern Europe. And this is now the map of Europe in 1919. As you can see, we are finally coming closer to the image of Europe we have today. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, this area over here, is dissolved into Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Romania. Romania becomes doubled. Bulgaria loses Western Thrace, but in return gets some territorial adjustments over here. But the biggest change is over here, the creation of Poland. Okay? Which cost territory to Germany. This part was German, up here, and cost territory to Russia, which is not Russia anymore, but the Russian Soviet Socialist Federated Republic. Now, the idea that on November 11th, 1918, the guns went silent in Europe is wrong. In many parts of Europe, war was ongoing or will be starting again. There were a number of civil wars going on, which lasted until 1923. For example, in the territory of the now defunct Russian Empire, you have on the one side the Bolsheviks fighting against big Ahtarma, to use a Turkish word, of enemies, including nationalists, socialists, monarchists, anarchists, and then powers and the Germans. Everybody is fighting everyone, literally. In Germany, the German Spartacists in Berlin and the communists of Bavaria all tried to create a Bolshevik revolution in Germany and come into conflict with the German government, which is essentially dominated by the Social Democrats and the Freikorps. And what are the Freikorps? The Freikorps are essentially non-governmental military troops, essentially veterans of the war who are organized by officers into armed militias with the goal of destroying the communists. In Ireland, you have the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, fighting the Irish Free State, the new government, autonomous, independent, de facto government of Ireland, fighting the United Kingdom in a three-way war. In Finland, there is a civil war between Finnish communists supported by the Russian Bolsheviks and Finnish conservatives supported by the Germans. But it's not just that. It's not just civil war. Most of these civil wars at the same time get tied to international wars. There are the wars over the legacy of the Russian Empire. Estonia fights the Bolsheviks. Latvia fights the Bolsheviks and the Baltic Germans who try to create their own German-dominated Baltic state. Russia, the Soviets, and the Poles fight a major war, the Russo-Polish War. Lithuania and the Poles fight each other and never make peace, essentially. The Soviets fight Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. And Georgia, by the way, is ruled by socialists, so you have red versus red conflicts. Azerbaijan fights Georgia and Armenia. Armenia and Georgia fight each other. The legacy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire also leads to war. Communist Hungary, so in Turkish history, you always learn that the first country to rebel against the Versailles system was Turkey. I'm afraid that is not completely correct. The first country to openly challenge the Versailles agreements was Hungary. You see, what happened in Hungary is when the war ended, there was a republic declared. That republic quickly was taken over by the communists under Bela Kun. And they immediately refused to accept the cession of Hungarian territories to Romania. This happened in 1919. And this led to the so-called Hungarian Adversaries War, where essentially the communist Hungarians fought against Romania and Czechoslovakia. They were defeated within 1919, so it's not a long war like the Turkish War of Independence. In Yugoslavia, we have the first movement of a new political movement. You see, the Italians got very pissed off by the end of the war. You see, they wanted Croatia, or at least the coasts of Croatia. But because there was an Italian minority there in Dalmatia, secondly, they wanted to get all the territories that were once ruled by an Italian state, by Venice. And the problem was, though, that Croatia had a majority of Slavs, Croatians living there. So the decision was to give Croatia and its large coastline to Yugoslavia. This pissed off the Italians, but the Italian government was not willing to do something about it. So this Italian poet, I don't remember his name, Annunzio, I think is his name, creates this paramilitary group of ex-soldiers organized along militaristic lines, following a philosophy that mixed nationalism with some elements of socialism, which is going to be called fascism, and goes and takes over the city of Trieste independently from everybody, and declares his own Republic of Trieste, which creates a big conflict between Yugoslavia and Italy and can almost lead to war. What about the Ottoman Empire? the collapse of the Ottoman Empire leads to a number of wars. The Turkish War of Independence, which in Greece is known as the Greek-Turkish War, is the biggest of them, in which the Turkish nationalist movement under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk defeats the attempt of the Greeks to incorporate Eastern Thrace and the area of Izmir, Smyrna into the Greek state. At the same time, that nationalist movement fights the French in the area of Sicilia, the Armenians in the east of the country, and defeats them as well. And with the Treaty of Lausanne, a new Turkish state is created, the Turkish Republic, and the overthrow of the Ottoman dynasty. So, in a way, the Ottoman dynasty gets to survive longest than any of the dynasties. Think about it, the Romanovs are dead by 1917. The Hohenzollerns are gone by 1918. The Habsburgs are gone by 1918. The Ottomans succeed in surviving until 1923, but they also fall in the end. Okay? Also, in Arabia, what is today Saudi Arabia, there is a conflict between Najd and Hejaz. Well, Hejaz is the old name of Saudi Arabia. What happened is, after the Arab revolt, the French went to the Arabs and told them, you thought you were going to get a country? That's very funny. Mon amis. So they kicked Faisal, the leader, the sheriff of Mecca, out of Damascus, and they gave him a state controlling Mecca and Medina. Well, turns out there's this crazy guy living in the middle of the desert that is called Ibn Saud, who is the leader of a weird heresy called the Wahhabis, who had troubled the Ottoman Empire in the past. And Ibn Saud decides that he's going to take control of the Mecca and Medina area, so he goes to war and he defeats Faisal, forcing them north into what is Transjordan and incorporating the holy sites of Islam into his kingdom. And that is how the Saudi kingdom comes to exist in the world. Finally, far away in Afghanistan, believing that maybe the war has exhausted the British Empire, the Afghan ruler decides to declare independence. This leads to the Third Anglo-Afghan War. The result of the war is interesting. The Afghans are defeated, but the British, deciding that it's impossible for them to anymore project power now because their economy is destroyed, recognize the full independence of Afghanistan. They permit it to have its own foreign policy. What we're going to learn is that they essentially give up on Afghanistan, and Russian dominance becomes pronounced. Any questions? If you want to learn more about this conflict, there is a YouTube series called Between Two Wars, which covers the interwar era, and your professor is also doing a YouTube series called Salvation and Catastrophe, where I cover the Turkish War of Independence, the Greek-Turkish War side, monthly, what happened 100 years ago. So if you want more in-depth information, use the YouTube. Mine is called Salvation and Catastrophe. Subscribe and like, if you like. Now, let's talk a bit about how they try to keep, so essentially, the war could have erupted anew right when it ended. Look at the amount of conflicts that are going on in the world. They could all have become connected together and led to an eruption of a bigger war. So how do the great powers try to avoid it? Well, they try to create a managerial system. And when it comes to consultation, they create the League of Nations. The League of Nations is something new in international politics, in the sense that they take the old Congress system, which had regular but ad hoc congresses, and they instead create an organization that is essentially dedicated to continuously provide Congress services to the international system. It is a permanent organization, doesn't ever close, and it has membership of all recognized states, including Ethiopia, Thailand, and China, which is a way for the European powers to tell these three countries that now we consider you as part of the European, in quotation marks, but now global interstate system. When it comes to multilateralism, they try to coordinate their actions by two parts. First of all, within the League of Nations, there's a collective security clause. This is again new. What is a collective security clause? Does any of you know? Okay? From your other classes, Introduction to International Relations. What's collective security? You can talk between you if you want. I see faces of like, oh, what am I supposed to talk? Collective security is when countries agree that if one of them is attacked by someone, all of them will step up to defend that one. It is a system in which essentially any attack on one member of that system is an attack on all members.
It's like an alliance.
It's like an alliance with the difference that unlike an alliance, it doesn't have a specific clause or a specific ally. It means any attack on one member covers all the other members. So it is like an alliance, but it's an alliance that includes everybody. It's something new in international relations. It has been discussed by visionaries, lawyers, and so on, but this is the first one that actually tried to put it. The idea is that this will deter any country from trying to revise the Versailles Agreement. So the idea will be, if Bulgaria attacked Greece, then every other country of the League of Nations should attack Bulgaria. If Greece attacked Turkey, then every other country of the League of Nations should attack Greece. If, well, France attacks Germany, everybody is supposed to defend Germany, and more importantly, if Germany attacks France, everybody is supposed to defend France. So that's the idea. No one really buys that very fully. It's put in there mostly for keeping the people who will run the organization to do it. The more important element is the Great Power Alliance. With the destruction of Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Germany as great powers, the club of powerful states is down to essentially 5. Japan, Italy, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States of America. Well, we're going to learn that the United States doesn't really care about it. So, screw this. But all of the other powers are members of the League of Nations and they're allied to each other. So, finally, because all of the great powers left are members of the same alliance, it also means avoidance of adversarial coordination. So it seems like we have finally something like the Vienna system working again. No! You will think. But there are deadly flaws, cancers within the body of this organization. First of all, the most powerful country in the world, the United States of America, refuses to join the League of Nations. Partly because, on the one hand, the president is a stubborn person who has a mental health breakdown, and partly because the leaders of the Republican Party really hate the president. So in a weird way, they end up making such an extremist position that instead of finding common ground to enter the League of Nations, America votes not to. Okay, that thing where I talked about how great it is because all the great powers are allied with each other, well, that works if the Soviet Union and Germany never again become great powers. But the simple reality is, even if de jure they're not great powers, de facto, because of their population, industrial capacity, and so on, they're latent great powers. So for this whole system to work, either these two countries must be kept from ever becoming great powers, or if they become great powers, they should be included and accommodated in the system. Well, here's the problem. The whole system is targeted against Germany and the Soviet Union. That's why they created the League of Nations. Funny thing, by the way, in the early years, from 1919 to, let's say, 1923, the British were actually more friendly to communism than the French. It was the French government that were the hardcore anti-communists. For example, the British wanted to give assistance to Georgia against the Soviets, but because the Georgian government was a social revolutionary government, anti-communist by the way, but too communist for the French blocked it all. They said no, jamais, none. The British actually tried to mediate between Bela Kun's communist state with Romania, but the French blocked it off. Non, jamais, non. So it's a, you know, usually we assume Britain is the fanatical anti-communist, but not in the early era of the interwar period. It's the French who are driving everything. Secondly, Japan and Italy is now ruled by Benito Mussolini and his fascisti, are technically winners in the war. But they are unsatisfied with what they get from the war. Japan feels it should have been given much more territory in China and in the Pacific and in the old Eastern Russia. Italy feels, well, we were promised territory in Turkey, we didn't get it. We were promised territory in the Adriatic, we didn't get it. We were promised colonies, we got something which is not worth it. So there is this general feeling that this status quo doesn't work for us. So they're more interested in using realpolitik power to gain more territory rather than to maintain the status quo. In another name, two of the great powers that are supposed to defend the status quo are revisionists. Let me give you an example of how bad this can be. George W. Bush, President of the United States of America, okay, number 43. The United States of America should be the status quo power in the world system. They won the Cold War, and yet he launched a huge number of wars in the Middle East, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, trying to change the status quo because he wasn't happy. And as you've guessed, that made everything much more difficult for everybody else in the world. Finally, fourth, many states are unsatisfied from the end results of the wars. Not just Italy and Japan. Greece is unsatisfied. Up to 1926, there were serious considerations up in Greece about restarting the Greek-Turkish War. It took two governments for these ideas to be completely put out of the picture. Bulgaria, extremely unsatisfied. It cannot fight a war because of restriction on its military, but doesn't need to. It supports the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, which wages a guerrilla conflict in Yugoslavia and in Greece. Poland, unsatisfied. It believes that a lot of the territory that it should have in Ukraine was taken away from it. Hungary, very unsatisfied. Even Lithuania is unsatisfied because the Poles took what the Lithuanians consider the historical capital of Vilnius. Lithuania and Poland, throughout this whole era, don't have official relations. Their border is closed. And finally, even in England, the United Kingdom, and in France, the countries that were the most powerful, the winners of the war, there were politicians that were unsatisfied with the results of the war. They felt that the status quo created from Versailles was unsustainable. So, 5 deadly flaws. Could you write at least 2 deadly flaws of the Versailles settlement in your notebook for me? If you write all the 5, bravo to you. But if you can write at least 2, that's great. I have no idea where you're going to learn about this, but give a try. So, tell me at least 2 of the deadly flaws of the Versailles Agreement. I gave you 5, just put at least 2 of them, yes. Huh?
Do you remember?
What do you have?
Reading.
What was
From speech.
the what? Roosevelt.
Yes.
We'll do it when World War I starts. But you couldn't come next week. Okay, you'll do it towards the end of the class, okay?
Okay.
I'm trying to keep the optional readings topical to the topics. Okay. Okay. So, despite the flaws, the system seems to work in its initial decade. Why? Money. When there's money, everything is so much easier in life. You're more tolerant of the quirks and weirdness of your husband or your wife. You're more tolerant of the stupidity of your boss. And you're more tolerant of a flawed international system because you're rich and you can buy stuff to forget about your problems. The roaring 20s was a great period of capitalist expansion. With the end of the war, a lot of the economic effort that had been put into the war was now put back into the economy. The liberalization of global trade that came as a result of the Versailles establishment created a massive economic boom. Everybody had a good life. Well, not everybody. I'm just using that as a term in general. Communism, this was the scared threat that everybody worried about, seemed to be contained within the Soviet Union. By 1925, there were only two communist states in the world, the Soviet Union and Mongolia. Everywhere else, the communists had failed. They had collapsed. Germany, the political situation seems stable, and in 1924, the German state, the German Reich, the Weimar Republic, is included as a member of the League of Nations. So it seems that accommodation will work. The economic prosperity and in reaction to the hardships of the war led people to a very hedonistic attitude to life. There was female liberation, there was sexual liberty, homosexuality became much more accepted in media in the 1920s. Women started dressing more provocatively and doing things like smoking, drinking, flying airplanes. In many places, women got the right to vote. There was generally a feeling of, you know, we lived through this war, we survived when everybody else died, so let's have some bloody fun. So, fast cars, fast planes, talking movies, swing music, all of it came in to create a hedonistic lifestyle. People were trying to have a good time. They didn't want to worry so much about the legacies of the war. The League of Nations seemed to work. There were a number of issues between 1923 and 1925 that the League of Nations was able to resolve peacefully. The demilitarization of the Åland Islands, the plebiscite, the referendum of Upper Silesia, the question of the occupation of Memel, the 1923 Greek-Turkish population exchange, the Greek-Bulgarian dispute of 1925, the so-called War of the Don. So the League at least seemed to be able to resolve problems between minor powers. Finally, in Washington, D.C., the great powers of the era make a naval agreement that turns out to be one of the most successful arms control treaties in the history of the world, under which they all agreed to a certain number of warships. So the system seems to work. And here is a good example of the kind of media that becomes important in this era, cartoons. You see, cartoons were initially for adults. You will go to the cinema to watch the news and cartoons. And Betty Boop, this is literally the name of the character, Betty Boop is one of those characters created in the era, the new, liberated, enthusiastic girls. idea. Now, let me cover this and then we can take a break. The country that was the most invested in the Versailles system was, of course, France. The French suffered greatly due to the war. They didn't suffer the most, but they suffered a lot. Their territory was occupied by Germany. France lost a whole generation of men in the war, and they wanted to secure themselves from Germany in perpetuity. So the main goal of France was to keep Germany down. They were afraid of Germany. They were unhappy because they believed the treaties had not attained their goal, which was the dissolution of the German state. They would have preferred a Europe where there will be a kingdom of Bavaria, a kingdom of Württemberg, a kingdom of Brandenburg, a Grand Duchy of Mecklenburg, rather than a German state. But they couldn't get that. So they considered Versailles the second best option. And they were opposed to any renegotiation of the Versailles Agreement. But they needed a great power ally, because by themselves they felt they wouldn't be strong enough to oppose Germany. Their problem was this too. Unlike the French, the elites in the United Kingdom were not as anti-German. They were not so focused and obsessed on Germany as a potential threat. So while France and England were allies, the French were always worried that if it came push to shove, the British would not have their back. Echoes of the fears of alliance defection from World War I. Well, what about Russia? Well, Russia was communist. And as I told you, the French Republicans were vociferously, very angrily anti-communist. So they just didn't consider in this year the possibility of an alliance with the Soviet Union. Not that the Soviet Union wouldn't have liked such an alliance, but they were not willing to do it. So instead, what they try to do is they try to replace great power allies with a network of alliances with the minor powers of the Central Europe and of the Balkans. They try to essentially create a little entente, which will include France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, into a grid of countries that would essentially isolate Germany. The problem is this. For a lot of these countries, the greatest threat is not Germany. The greatest threat is each other. Czechoslovakia and Poland, they have issues. Romania and Poland, they have issues. Yugoslavia has issues with the countries around it. So, what's the result of this? That there's only one great power in Europe that France can consider possible as an ally. Fascist Italy. And as we have learned from Italian foreign policy in this era, the Italians are more than willing to say they're your friend. They just want something in return. So the result of this is that France has no choice but to rely too much on Poland and Italy for its security. And this means tolerating Polish and Italian irredentism and essentially undermining the Versailles system in service of securing it. You understand the contradiction in the French policy. To defend the Versailles system from Germany, they have to tolerate the weakening of the Versailles system by Italy and Poland. So this is not a situation that's going to lead to a good result. What about the Soviets? Wait, sorry, I went really fast. Okay. Let's take a break, actually. We talked before about France's main problem. Can anybody tell me what the contradiction is in French policy when it comes to defending the Versailles Agreement? No one can tell me? Write it in your notebook, please. What is the contradiction in French policy when it comes to defending the Versailles Agreement? The contradiction in French policy, the problem, if you want. What are they trying to do that undermines that what they're trying to do? Contradiction means doing something that actually doesn't get you what you want.
French politicians are not satisfied for this treaty.
Well, they're not. They're trying to do something to make it work, but that something creates a problem. They still want to keep the treaty. But they're doing something that makes it very hard. Okay. We talked about French policy. Let's talk about Italian policy. And Italy is a big, big problem for the Versailles system. Italy is ruled by a coalition between conservative monarchists around the court and populist fascists of Benito Mussolini. It's wrong to think that Benito Mussolini rules Italy. That's not the truth. He actually has to share power with the king and a coterie of conservative politicians around the king. So Italy is really a dualistic system. You have Benito Mussolini with his fascisti and their stupid salutes and big parades and Il Duce. But the reality is he has to be very careful about how the royal personage is going to react to what he does. Now, the good thing for Mussolini is that everybody in Italy agrees that the Versailles Agreement sucks and that Italy has been denied its place in the sun. Okay? And as a result, throughout the interwar era, Italy pursues a policy of aggression against Greece, Albania, and Ethiopia. Because the French can't get an alliance with the United Kingdom or Russia, they have to work close with Italy and Poland, both of which are revisionist powers. As a result of this, France has to tolerate and even support Italian attempts to change the Versailles system. So what happens is that the League of Nations that's supposed to underpin the Versailles system is undermined by Italy, which is doing what it does with full French support. Essentially, Mussolini uses the antagonism between France, the United Kingdom, and Germany to set himself as the arbitrator of Europe, the referee. He sets himself as the person that all the great powers can trust to help them resolve the issues. He tries to essentially be a second Bismarck, with the only difference that Italy is not German and Mussolini is not Bismarck. He's helped by the fact that for most of this early period, the Soviet Union pursues a policy of isolation. You see, initially the Soviets said, oh, what are treaties? They're unimportant. Tomorrow the great Soviet revolution will happen in all of Europe. Europe will be red and we will live in brotherhood. That's one of the reasons why they signed the Brest-Litovsk agreement. And that's why in general the Soviets were unwilling to make any promises to anybody, because they said, why should we make promises to these bourgeois politicians? They're all going to be dead. Well, doesn't work that way. There is no German revolution. The Spartacists and the Bavarian communists are defeated. And that means that all of the plans of the Soviet leaders for future politics are undone. And they come to the conclusion that they have to find allies and end their isolation. Initially, they work with other states that were not exactly part of the club, the Turkish Republic, Mongolia and so on, but then they find their break, and their break is Germany. Both Germany and the Soviet Union are pariahs in the Versailles system, so it's quite logical that they will cooperate with each other. With the Treaty of Rapallo, Germany and the Soviet Union exchange economic help, political cooperation, and most importantly, military cooperation. You see, Germany cannot have a big army, but the Soviet Union has a big army. So what happens is the Germans send their officers to Russia to get trained. They also get their know-how. They give the Russians military industrial technology. In return, they get military support. You see, the Soviets and the Germans might hate each other, but they agree on one thing. They really hate Poles. Both Germany and the Soviet Union see Poland as an existential threat that has to be destroyed. So they're willing to cooperate if that can help them to destroy the Polish state. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, there are 100 problems going on. There is Hungarian irredentism. Everybody's scared Hungary is going to try to liberate the Hungarian minorities in Czechoslovakia and Romania. There is Polish aggression against Lithuania, primarily. There are the political activism of Hungarian and German minorities in Czechoslovakia and Romania. There is a German minority in Italy that creates problems between Mussolini and German governments. And in Yugoslavia, very quickly, the interests of Croats and Serbs come to collide, creating political instability. Finally, both Greece and Albania go through a period of extreme political instability with coups and counter-coups. What about Japan? Japan sought to use the Russian Civil War as an opportunity to gain territory in Manchuria. This didn't work out. Once the Reds became strong enough, they forced the Japanese to evacuate to a big degree Manchuria, except from some areas. They also attempted to control China. In 1911, finally, there is a Chinese Han Revolution against the Qing dynasty that overthrows the Chinese empire. So another empire dies, but before the war. This is replaced by a Chinese republic which completely fails. And by 1911, China is essentially divided in these areas controlled by powerful military leaders called warlords that are engaged in war with each other, foreign powers, and are engaged in trying to use foreign powers to patronage them. 1928, this period of warlordism comes to an end when Chiang Kai-shek, one of the warlords, who promotes a nationalist socialist ideology through his Kuomintang party, is able to defeat all of the warlords and force them to accept a centralized government. Throughout this period, Japan vacillates. It cannot decide. Sometimes it works with the nationalists of Chiang Kai-shek and supports them in their anti-world activities, and sometimes it focuses on its own expansion and fights with Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists. So it's not very clear what the Chinese want to get out of it. Some of the Japanese want to get out of it. Some Japanese decision makers see a united China under a nationalist government that has good relations with Japan as the best resolution of its issues. Others too believe that it's better if Japan itself directly incorporates China into its empire. This divide between ultra-nationalists, mainly in the army, and moderates in the Japanese government when it comes to Chinese politics becomes deadly, with assassinations and attempted coups, and more pronounced as the time passes. In this era, the Japanese governments, whether the ultranationalists or the moderates, consider the British alliance paramount and are very focused on pleasing Britain. Also, they're increasingly expecting that there will be a war with America in the future, and they're starting to think about how to prepare for it. Let's talk about Germany. Economic prosperity, the 1920s, roaring 20s, helped stabilize the government. By the way, if you want to learn more about Germany in this era, there is a TV series called Babylon Berlin, which is about a detective in the Weimar Republic. It might be worth watching. I don't know, it might be fun. And it's about all of this era. The Republican government, dominated initially by the Social Democrats, defeats both the left and the right. There is an attempted coup by Ludendorff, the quartermaster general in World War I, and Hitler, a new politician, which is defeated. At some point, the Social Democrats lose their power to Gustav Stresemann, a moderate conservative politician. Now, Stresemann doesn't like the Versailles Agreement any more than any German. All of the German parties want to revise it. But Stresemann has an interesting way of revising it. He decides that the Versailles Agreement has fundamental elements that can be used to undermine other elements. So he says, we're going to use the Versailles Agreement to undermine the Versailles Agreement. And the most important part of it is the right of nationalities. Stresemann says, central to the Versailles system is the idea that every nationality has the right to its own state and special autonomy if they cannot get to their own state, and that borders should follow national principles. Well, the problem is, in Eastern Europe, all of these Germans are living under Czech and Polish rule, and they are mistreated. So, this is against the principles of the Versailles. So, he allies with the Soviets. Whenever the French react badly to his policy, he doesn't fight back, but instead uses passive resistance, for example, at Ruhr. So non-violent resistance, which works very well in this case. And essentially he tells the French and the British, Germany has no problems in the West. We want to guarantee the borders in the West. He signs the Locarno Treaties, becomes a member of the League of Nations, and he tells them, in the West, Germany does not want any changes. It's in the East that things have to change. But in the East, they have to change not because of realpolitik or German aggression, they have to change because they violate the principles of the Versailles Agreement. These borders are not national borders. His plan is to essentially force England and France to essentially give up on Czechoslovakia and Poland. And then isolating Czechoslovakia and Poland to ally with the Soviets and either wage war or force Poland and Czechoslovakia to change the border. So his plan is stability in the West, change will be the price the great powers will have to pay for change in the East. Well, unfortunately for him, in 1929, he dies. And with his death, what happens is that the conservative, moderate parties that he had helped come to power become unable to win elections. And as a result, a lot of the rich, powerful capitalist interests that had supported moderate conservatism start giving their money and support to more populist right-wing groups. So Germany enters into a political crisis. What about Britain? Well, Britain goes back to glorious isolation in a way. They don't really care about Europe. As I told you, they have already decided the world is not European anymore. They care about managing their empire. They want closer relationship with the United States, but the United States, unfortunately, is not always giving them up. They want closer relationship with Japan, which they see key to their security of their empire in Asia. They're generally willing to accept some restoration of German demands in the east of Europe. And another thing, they're willing to see Poland and Czechoslovakia lose some territory to Germany if that's the price for stability in the west of Europe. Okay? This is terrifying for the French. because they are always worried that England is not going to stand up to Germany if Germany ever tries to do something in Eastern Europe, and that it will defect. And in 1923-1924, at the Ruhr crisis, when France and Belgium used military force to force Germany to give them reparations, Britain did defect. It took the side of Germany. So there are good reasons for the French to feel very worried about the loyalty of their British allies. And then it happens. In 1928, I think it was a Black Monday or a Black Friday, I can't remember, the great crash. The American stock exchange collapses, okay? Because the world had become globalized and the capitalist system had become very interwoven in the interwar years, this American collapse leads to the economic collapse of most of Western Europe. There is a crisis in England and in France. The crisis in England and France leads to a crisis in Germany and Italy. The crisis in Germany and Italy affects all the countries that owe money or have money from Germany and Italy, like Greece. The result is that politics in Europe become tense. Until now, prosperity had masked the problems we talked about. And most people had accepted liberal bourgeois democracy, parliamentary democracy, as a system of government that works. But with the collapse of the economy, the prosperity ends. There's not enough money for everybody anymore. So the class conflict between the working class, the bourgeois, and the political conflicts between conservatives and nationalists come to the fore. Liberal democracy is undermined. So nationalist groups or military dictators come to power in many countries and they start challenging the Versailles settlement. Among them, Adolf Hitler. And if you want an idea, here are all the dictatorships in Europe 1920-1929. You have Poland, which becomes a one-party state in 1926. Hungary, which has been a royal, viceroyal dictatorships in 1920. Italy, a dictatorship under Benito Mussolini in 1922. Bulgaria becomes a dictatorship in 1923 when Stamboliski, the liberal politician, is assassinated. Spain has a dictatorship in 1923. Lithuania, Portugal, and Turkey all have one-party governments or dictatorships. Okay? 1929-1935, all of these states are added. Germany becomes a dictatorship in 1933. Austria, 1933. Yugoslavia, 1929. Estonia, 1934. Latvia, 1934. Finland, 1931. Greece, 1935. So the crash increases the number of authoritarian states in Europe. These do not become democratic. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 authoritarian states in Europe after 1930s. So there are dark clouds ahead. let's move on to the start of the end. Okay. Darkest hour. Now, the consequences of the Great Crash were political instability in Europe and globally. Okay? The delegitimization of laissez-faire capitalism, a liberal parliamentary democracy, people stopped believing in these systems. The increased support for anti-liberal political ideologies. And in turn, these anti-liberal political ideologies saw increased competition, socialism versus communism versus fascism. And finally, the decision of many political elites that the solution to political troubles was not trade and cooperation, was not being part of a wider world, but was creating a world you controlled by yourself. So there is a demand for policies of autarky, countries exiting the international system and creating self-sufficient empires and states that do not have to trade with anybody. Let's see how this crisis plays out in Europe, and we will have the relevant readings. Now, the collapse of democratic regimes in Balkans, the Baltic region, and in Eastern Europe leave only Czechoslovakia as a functioning but problematic democracy. The result of this is that the French alliance system that had been based on keeping all of the Balkan states together and Eastern European states together collapses, which means that more and more the French have to rely on Poland. The end of the Russian Civil War had seen about 500,000 refugees leave Russia. Most of them were white immigrants, they were conservatives, and with them came the popular anti-Semitic ideas that were prevalent among Russian nationalists. And these ideas of these white Russians became copied or intensified the anti-Semitism in Europe. For example, you might not know this, but Adolf Hitler's first financier was a Russian, a fanatical anti-Semitic, anti-communist Russian. Let's talk about the Nazis. With the death of Gustav Stresemann, the politics of Germany come into chaos. Out of this chaos, the conservative elites, getting worried by the increasing power of the Communist Party, decide to find leaders that can maintain the status quo, if need be, without democracy. So they're willing to work with Adolf Hitler's Nazi party because they have the same external goals. They both want to destroy Poland, and they both want to change Versailles in the East. They also have compatible internal goals. They both want to manage the working classes without giving them actual power, and they both want to see the end of the Weimar Republic. So the conservatives that help Hitler are not necessarily Nazis, but it's unimportant. They're willing to work with Hitler because they can agree on some things. And they believe they could control Hitler. Between 1930 and 1933, taking advantage of the collapse of the conservative parties after Stresemann's death, the Nazis are able to increase their voting share. So in 1928, the Nazis got 2.6% of the vote. In 1930, they have increased that vote share to 18.25% by essentially inheriting the biggest part of the old populist conservative party voters. By 1932, they have taken the biggest share of votes, 37.27%. In the second election, they have close to 33.9%. Having shown their ability to win 1/3 of the votes in Germany, the conservative elites decide to fully support a Hitler chancellorship, to make Hitler the prime minister. He becomes the prime minister, and then he uses the Reichstag fire, which was probably created by the Nazis themselves, to blame communists and Jews of a conspiracy to overthrow the political system. And that permits him to impose the Enabling Act, which essentially gives the Chancellor the power of the president and makes Hitler de facto dictator of Germany. You have to understand this. The Nazis never won an election in the sense of getting a majority of votes. The other third of the German people voted for the communists, and the other third voted for Weimar parties. But the point is that 2/3 of the German people voted against the Weimar Republic, whether they wanted to replace it with the Soviet Socialist Republic of Germany, or whether they wanted to replace it with the Nazi state. But no one voted overwhelmingly for the Nazis. So why did the Republic fail? First of all, well, because the conservatives decided they wanted it to fail. As I said, Hitler never won an election. At most he got 30% of the vote, 37% of the vote. It was the conservative elites that permitted him to become chancellor. It was the conservative elites that permitted him to get the Enabling Acts. As I said, while the majority of Germans did not want Hitler, the majority of Germans did not want the Weimar Republic either. If you agree, if you take together, here's a comparison. On one side is Nazi and communist vote together. On the other side is the vote for those parties that were pro-Republic. In 1928, as you can see, the Nazis and communists only got 30% of the vote, while the pro-Republican parties got 55%. In 1930, results are much closer. The communists and the Nazis get 31%. The Republican parties still have a majority of 36%. In 1932, too, 51% of the electorate votes for Nazi or communist. In 1932, in the second election, 50%. Simply put, a majority of the German people did not want the Republic to survive. And finally, most importantly, the Social Democrats, who were the main Republican faction, were not willing to fight a civil war. They had the military means to fight it. They had their own militias, the gold and black and red formations. They had even military officers that were willing to do it. The chief of staff of the Weimar army could, okay, his name is really weird, you can look it up, was called the Red General. He actually told Hitler, if you ever try to overthrow the Republic by violence, you will die. But when it came push to shove, they all decided that it was better for Germany to have the Nazis getting power than for Germany to go down into civil war. As we are going to see, that might not have been the wise decision. What about in the East? Well, China is in civil war and has clashes with the Soviet Union. In Japan, a political crisis starts to happen because of the increased industrialization. The workers demand more rights. And this leads to Japanese capitalist elites and conservative elites to become more and more determined to protect their power by undermining the democratic elements of the Japanese constitution. Military officers, especially those in the China Kwantung Army, the Japanese army fighting in China, wish for a more authoritarian regime. They try 4 times to overthrow the government between 1931 and 1934, and 2 prime ministers are actually murdered, plus including some commanders of the Navy and of the Army. Between 1931 and 1933, the Kwantung Army, independently of the Japanese government, I'm not kidding you, the Japanese government had no idea what's going on, provokes a war with China, which leads to China losing Manchuria and the creation of a puppet state called Manchukuo. In 1936, they again try a coup d'etat. The coup d'etat is failed again, but this time, important elements of the Japanese elites decide that, you know what? At some point, these crazy bastards are going to succeed and they'll kill us all. So instead of, I don't know, killing them, they actually give in. They essentially end civilian rule to Japan. They declare a court dictatorship around the emperor, and essentially an alliance of conservative military officers and aristocrats, I'm not kidding you, literally princes, create an authoritarian system that tries to contain the crazy nationalists. The problem is it fails. And as a result of that, Japan embarks on a policy of expansion. Elsewhere in the world, in the United States of America, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt engages in a policy of increased state intervention, but is still isolationist. There is immense opposition to any American interjection in European affairs, through not when it comes to opposing Japan. Racism plays its role. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin industrializes the Soviet Union, but also creates a very repressive regime, and using the Great Purges, either because he used them or because he lost control of the people under him, the Soviet Union becomes extremely dictatorial. At the same time, there are policies decimating problematic populations. In Ukraine, there is a famine. The Greeks of the Soviet Union are expelled into the Kazakhstan area. Jews are arrested and deported. Latin America, everywhere authoritarian regimes. There is a war between Paraguay and Bolivia called the Chaco War, which is fought over oil, and results, and probably resulted from depression. While in Arabia, in maybe a continuation of what's going on right now, there's a war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It goes back to there, back to 1934, these Yemeni-Saudi conflicts. So, what's Hitler's foreign policy? You can divide it into two stages, okay? In the first stage, he wants to overturn the Versailles system in the East by making territorial gains against Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Austria. And he wants to officially end any restrictions on the German military. Once those two goals are attained, his second goal is to launch a major war in Eastern Europe and occupy most of the territory of Poland and the Soviet Union in order to create a Germanic empire that can be self-sufficient of Turkey. By the way, he wrote this. Everybody would have known it. He wrote it in a book called My Fight, Kavgam in Turkey. So everybody should have known about this because he openly said it. Now, here's the thing. The first stage policies were widely supported in Germany and had been pursued by Stresemann himself. We already talked about that. The second policies were not as well known. Or when people learned about them, they said, oh, he's just joking. It's just romantic utopian ideas. He's not really going to do that. So I'm not serious. So they read it. They read Mein Kampf. He clearly says that I'm going to fucking conquer the East and kill all the Slavs. And politicians in France were like, oh, come on. It is just a political thing. It's like, you know, when someone tells you they're going to kill you, take it seriously. So let's see how he attains the first stage. And this is where the readings that you guys have to do come in. First of all, he seeks cooperation with the new authoritarian militarist Japan. In 1933, Japan leaves the League of Nations due to criticism over the Manchurian War. It's the first great power to leave it. So what he does in support of Japan, he also takes Germany out of the League of Nations, and he directly challenges the West by saying, I'm rearming Germany. France is like, let's stop this. But England is, well, we think it's quite logical. Germany is a great power. It should have military, I believe. So what the French were scared of actually happens. Here comes a direct threat to the Versailles system, and essentially the key of it for French security, and Britain is like, let us talk with the Germans. Then, in the East, Hitler is smart. He knows that the various Eastern European states hate each other as much as they hate Germany. So what he does is he supports the irredentism of each against the other. So for example, despite openly having said multiple times he wants to destroy Poland, he actually tells Poland, hey, I know you want that territory in Czechoslovakia. Hey, go for it, Poland. And the Poles go for it. Okay? He supports Hungary against Poland and Romania and Czechoslovakia. He goes to Hungary and says, we know the Trianon, it's like Versailles, it sucks. We are going to support you. We are going to support you. So Hungarians start advocating. And he supports Romania against Hungary. Essentially, trying to place a situation where Romania and Hungary have no choice but to become German satellites. Because if they don't do it, then they're going to be scared he's going to support one against the other. He undermines Austrian regimes, including assassinating the fascist Austrian dictator Dollfuss. Dollfuss is a fascist. Hitler has him killed. Why? Because Dollfuss is opposed to Nazi power in Austria. And when he talks about changing borders in the East, which is already happening thanks to Poland, Hungary and Romania, he always says, I'm not trying to take territories because of strategy or empire. I just want all the German folk to be in one German folk state. It's your principles of Versailles. It works great. With Japan out of the league, only UK, France and Italy can actually stop Germany. Well, France is worried, as we said, and wants to do something, but guess what? Hitler has already undermined the system because its Eastern European allies are in conflict with each other. The Poles and the Czechs are at each other's throat. The Romanians and the Poles are at each other's throat. So, great. Your allies are fighting each other. They're so useful. As we said, the Brits are willing to tolerate changes in the Versailles system as long as those changes are based on the principles of the Versailles system. So they tell France, well, you know, if the change in the borders is because of the nationality principle, it's not really violating the treaty. The Brits are like, what are you talking about? I don't care about the principles. I don't want the damn Germans to get more territory and an army. Yes, but if they do it based on the principles of the treaty, it is not a violation of the treaty. Merd, go to the French. Now, good news is initially, one great power is very anti-Nazi, and that is Italy. Wait a minute. What's going on here? All the fascists and the Nazis are like with each other. Well, remember what I told you? Italy has a German minority, and what does Hitler want to do? Incorporate all the German minorities in the German state. So initially, the fascists, Mussolini, are freaked out because they see a threat to their territorial integrity. So in 1934, they actually almost go to war. There was almost an Italian-German war over Austria. So the result of this is that France does find a great power who wants to oppose Germany. Unfortunately, that great power is Italy. And what have we learned about Italy in this class? If you want something from Italy, you gotta cut off half your kidneys and give it to her. Okay? Finally, the French and the British include the Soviet Union in the League of Nations in order to counter the exit of Japan and Germany. The problem with that is that Poland and the Czech Republic both hate the Soviet Union. So it just throws everything up. So, let's start from the beginning of the end. In 1935, Benito Mussolini invades Ethiopia. Okay? And he believes that because France needs Italy so much, the League of Nations is not going to do anything. This is an official invasion of a sovereign state. Okay? And he's right. The League of Nations reacts with weak sanctions and saying, oh, don't do it, Italy, but nothing more. Which prompts Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, to go to the League of Nations and give a talk. So, who had the talk by Haile Selassie? One of you was up to date? Let's see. Yes, Enes Koraya said? Yeah, so tell us about what Haile Selassie says. Are you going to do it next week, you said?
Yeah.
Ah, that's a pity. Now will be perfect. Yeah, there we go. That's a pity. Well, he'll tell us next week then. Okay. That's a pity. Don't worry, my fault. Okay. By 1937, Italy has defeated Ethiopian resistance by essentially gassing the Ethiopians to death. And when the League of Nations votes to condemn the brutality of the Italian occupation, then Mussolini exits the League of Nations. He's like, who do you think you are to tell me that I'm brutal to the Africans? Io sono un grande maggiore Stato. So that only leaves France, the UK, and the Soviet Union as major power members of the League of Nations. Japan, Germany, and Italy are outside it. Then, I'm not going to talk about the Spanish Civil War a lot because we need to go a bit fast, so I can actually let you early rather than kill you all with my non-stop talk. There's a civil war in Spain. Essentially, the Spanish monarchy had collapsed. A republic had been declared, but in that republic there was extreme polarization between left-wingers and right-wingers, between anti-clerical socialists, liberals, and anarchists on one side, and on the other hand, traditional monarchists and traditional conservatives. And into it there was also an element of autonomy versus centralization. Anyhow, by 1936, the fascist Catholic monarchists under Generals Sanjuro and Franco challenged the republic and lead to a civil war. Germany and Italy support the fascists, the nationalists, while the Soviets support the republic. England and France, despite being Republican liberal democracies themselves, despite many French people and English people willing to fight for the republic, officially remain neutral. And their neutrality destroys the republic because it makes it impossible for support to go. So Franco wins the war. And this is seen as a major defeat of the liberal democracies. Why did they let this happen? Well, first of all, they didn't want a piece of Italy because they still thought they could use Italy against Germany. Secondly, they were scared of the Soviet Union. And that's going to be a recurring problem. With Germany supporting Italy and Ethiopia, Germany and Italy cooperating in Spain, and the French and English unwilling to give Italy what it asks, Japan, Germany, and Italy create an anti-Comintern pact in 1937, which was aimed against the Soviet Union. This is the basis of what we're going to call the Axis powers in World War II. The important thing here is that this is the final defection of Italy from the Western powers. So what are the consequences for this? The Axis emboldens Japanese aggression in East Asia and leads to the Second Sino-Japanese War, where the Japanese actually try to conquer most of China. They try to challenge the Soviet Union in the East, but they're quickly defeated by the much better and more powerful Soviet army. So the Japanese are like, okay, we leave you alone. We accept, we just kill the Chinese. We're nice, okay? In 1938, Germany forces Austria to become part of it through the Anschluss. Because of the need of Italian support for this Anschluss, France and the UK do not react. When Germany did this, it said that we're uniting Germany with Austria because both of them are German states, and under the principle of nationalities, they should both be united. So, undermining the Versailles Agreement is a natural consequence of the very principles of the Versailles Agreement. So why are the Anglo-French playing along? Okay? Well, the French are desperate. They still believe in their Eastern European alliances. And, well, those allies were not Pacific, so the French had to tolerate some irredentism themselves. Secondly, neither French nor England believed they were ready for a war. Their armies were still rebuilding after the crack. So they preferred to accommodate in order to win time for full military preparations. Three, they're unwilling to ally with the Soviet Union. They put their bets on the wrong horse. They thought that they could use Italy against Germany. But Italy allied with Germany. And finally, the British, going back to good old 18th century politics, have decided, why should we fight? Hopefully the French and the Russians will take care of Germany first, and we won't have to do anything. So the British have this willingness not to commit to a conflict before France and Russia commit to the conflict. And that holds the Allies back. So now we come to the very end of the Versailles system, and that is the Sudeten crisis, 1938-1939. Here's the problem. In Czechoslovakia, there is a big, active German minority which is demanding union with Germany. They have always created these problems. They were never happy. And they used violence. Their violence fed an increasing authoritarianism in the Czechoslovakian government, which in turn weakened the image of Czechoslovakia as a democratic country, which in turn permitted Hitler to argue that Czechoslovakia is not a democratic country, so under the principle of nationalities, those Germans should be included into Germany. Okay? So when the Nazis got power in Germany, the conflict between Sudeten Germans and Czechoslovakia became much more violent and militarized. And Hitler threatened war if the Czechoslovakian government did not give the Sudeten Germans what they wanted. But again, he claimed that he's doing this in the name of the principle of nationalities. Okay, under the Versailles treaties. Because he expected that if he does that, the UK and France would not oppose him. Now, the reality is that the French and the British and the Soviets got very worried by this. They were accepting the Anschluss because ultimately Austria was a German land. But here we're talking about a minority demanding the dissolution of a majority state. Now, the Soviets were willing to work with the Western Allies to protect Czechoslovakia. But France and the UK refused. Why? First of all, the United Kingdom was fanatically anti-communist. The roles had changed, where in the start of the interwar period, France was anti-communist, Britain more willing to accommodate. Now, Britain is fanatically anti-communist, and France more willing to accommodate. France simply does not consider it possible for it to break its alliance with Britain in order to get an alliance with the Soviets. And finally, the Soviets are unwilling to fight by themselves. They demand allies. They don't want to be the suckers that have to fight the Germans first. Worst things worst. Poland, whose territory a Soviet army that wants to help Czechoslovakia has to cross, is actually working with the Nazis because it has its own territorial demands on Czechoslovakia. So the Nazis and the Poles at the same time are demanding from Poland territory, And the Poles tell the Soviets that if you try to send an army to help Czechoslovakia, we will fight it. So, as a result, Czechoslovakia is isolated, unwilling to fight by itself. France decides that it has no choice but to work with England to win time. So they forced Czechoslovakia to accept the Munich Agreement, under which the Sudetenland, that means a huge chunk of the Czechoslovakian state, goes to Germany, and Poland and Hungary also gain territories. This is the most important event in the interwar period, because now we know that if the French and the British had been willing to threaten war to Germany, Adolf Hitler would have died. Because we know that there was a coup prepared by key military leaders who were unwilling to see Germany fight a war yet, because they didn't think it was ready. So if the French and the English in 1939-8 had said to Hitler, back down or there will be war, probably there would have been a coup d'etat in Germany. But their decision to support the Sudeten Agreement, the Munich Agreement, saved Hitler. Okay, who had to read Adolf Hitler, Neville Chamberlain, Peace in Our Time. Okay, so this is actually the speech that Neville Chamberlain made when he came back to Britain from Munich, where he had agreed, where he had signed the agreement. He literally had the agreement in his hand, and what did he say?
We, the German Congress and Chancellor and the British Prime Minister, have had a private meeting today, and are waiting recognizing the question of Anglo-German relations is of the first importance for all our two countries and for Europe. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbol of the desire of two peoples never go to war with one another again. We are resolved that the method of consultation shall be the method adopted to deal with any other question that may concern our two countries. And we are determined to continue our efforts to reveal possible sources of difference and thus contribute to assure the peace of Europe. My good friends, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister has returned from Germany, bringing peace with him. I believe it's peace for our time. Go home and get a nice break.
Yes, he literally held the paper and said, peace for our time. Here's the fact. Maybe at that moment Chamberlain believed he got peace, thank you very much, but he actually knew he didn't the rest of the time. Let's see what happens. The consequences of the Munich Agreement are momentous for European history and global history. First of all, having failed to support the Spanish Republic, and now having failed to support Czechoslovakia, the last democracy in Eastern Europe, the Western powers have lost all credibility. All of the Balkan states, except from Greece, all of the Balkan states decide to work with Germany and Eastern European states. Secondly, the Soviet Union decides that the Western allies are not to be trusted, that they are not willing to fight Germany, and they will prefer that Russia pay the price and fight first. So Stalin says, screw that. And he reaches over the border and signs with the Nazis the Molotov-Ribbentrop Act. Now Stalin is not stupid. He knows Hitler will attack him. He read Mein Kampf, and unlike the others, he took seriously the promises in it, okay? But he doesn't want to be the idiot who gets attacked first. He knows 18th century politics. He's seen what the Allies are doing. He is determined not to be the sucker. So he hopes that by accommodating with Hitler, he'll gain time to prepare his own military, and that he'll push Hitler to first attack France in the West. Okay? Now Hitler is happy. Or he's going to attack Stalin in the future, but in the future, right now he gets all of the raw resources from the Soviet Union, and the most important thing of all, he doesn't have to worry about a two-front war. Unlike Wilhelmine Germany, he now has the option of fighting France without having to fight Russia at the same time. Finally, this is the death sentence for Poland. Because the two countries that want to destroy it are now fully militarized and allied with each other. Romania and Hungary become closer to Germany. Hitler uses that to support Slovakian independence from Czechoslovakia, which leads to the dissolution of the Czechoslovakian state, and then he forces the remaining Czech part of the state to become a protectorate of Germany. And Chamberlain is peace in our times, bloody no. They thought they had gained time. They thought Hitler would obey the Munich Agreement and respect Czechoslovakian independence. They were wrong. The fall of Czechoslovakia is important because the Czechs had a good military industry. Skoda, you know the Skoda company with the cars? That's a Czech company. So when Hitler took over Czechoslovakia, he got all of the material, the guns, the tanks, the artillery, permitting him to fully modernize his army. So Italy invades Albania, taking advantage of this, and Germany forces Lithuania to give up the area of Memel. Hitler's decision to destroy Czechoslovakia as an independent state leads the French under Dédalier and the British under Chamberlain to understand that war is now unavoidable. What they try to avoid is unavoidable. So they decide that next time Germany creates a crisis, France and the United Kingdom will not back down and will go to war if that is needed. The United Kingdom ends its isolation and officially enters into an alliance with Poland. Okay, some of you had readings, so let's do them really quick. The faster you do them, the better for all of us who can live earlier. Go for it, Jansu. So it's more appropriate for next week. What can we do? This is the declaration of war by the United States of America against the Empire of Japan in World War II.
It's in December 7, 1941. Roosevelt explains that a day which will live in infamy. USA was suddenly attacked by...
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert, you know in the movies, go on.
USA was suddenly attacked by naval and air forces of Empire States of Japan. They bombed America's navy at Pearl Harbor. That's why the speech is also referred as Pearl Harbor speech. Congress passed a formal declaration of war against Japan and officially wrote USA into World War II. The speech is one of the most famous of all American political speeches. First paragraph of speech was carefully worded to reinforce Roosevelt's portrayal of the U.S. as the innocent victim of unprovoked Japanese, and the theme of innocence violated was further reinforced by Roosevelt's recounting of the ongoing diplomatic negotiations with Japan. And he emphasized his confidence in the strength of the American people to face up to the challenge posed by Japan, citing the unbounded determination of our people. He sought to reassure the public that there is steps being taken to ensure their safety, and he directed that all measures be taken for our defense. Also, he made a point of emphasizing that our people, our territory, and our interests are in great danger. His speech had the desired effect, and he sought to emphasize the historic nature of the events at Pearl Harbor, implicitly urging the American people never to forget the attack and memorialize its day. The term Day of Infamy has become widely used by the media to refer to any moment of supreme disgrace or evil.
Okay, thank you. And is it true you want to do today your...
I can do it next week if it's...
Next week, okay, fine. Anybody else had a speech for me? Okay, everybody, thank you very much. Remember to turn in your notebooks and have a great week.